Next up to the stage is the first panel, Pioneering New Approaches to Reach California's Climate Goals. Your moderator is Chief Sustainability and Economic Development Officer at the LADWP, Nancy Sutley. Nancy works directly with the water and power systems as well as the Chief Sustainability Officer in the Mayor's Office on energy efficiency, water conservation, economic development, and electrification of the transportation network. Please welcome Nancy Sutley and her panel to the stage.
All right. You have these are for the slides. Look for the slides. You can. Good morning, everybody, and first I want to thank the LA Business Council for another great conference and for asking me to moderate this very exciting and impressive panel. And I think in the theme that Marisa Buchanan started talking about solutions for climate change and the role that financial institutions play, I think we have today an exciting panel that's really going to talk about this sort of notion of where we are integrating and balancing our economic and social considerations and really moving forward in a lower carbon economy here in California. And this has clearly been, as we approach the 10th anniversary of AB 32, really the ball has not stopped rolling here in California. Last year, the legislature passed and the governor signed SB 350. We have had a little problem with our natural gas system this year. Here in Southern California, certainly a lot of activity at the federal level with the Clean Power Plan and the uncertainty around what's going to happen with the Clean Power Plan, I think. On top of all of that policy movement and all of those interrelated and complicated issues around policy, there's real movement in the market. There's real movement in the utility sector. This is a real time of transformation, of reducing dependence on fossil fuel, increasingly turning to conservation and distributed resources, and figuring out how to use new technology, whether it's information technology, to reach our customers. I think the pace of change in the energy sector is really quite remarkable. And this panel, I think, will help us to explore what that means from a lot of different perspectives, from the business perspective, from the regulatory and public policy perspective, and from the perspective of large customers as well. So I think for all of you who are here, you will hear about what's going on not just in California, but particularly here in Southern California. And for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, this really is an incredible moment of transformation. And really, at the core, sustainability ends up being the driver for that transformation, whether it's in water conservation, in energy efficiency, in eliminating coal from our portfolio, in growing solar and other renewables, both locally and at utility scale, to rebuilding our coastal power plants to eliminate the use of ocean water for cooling, installation of electric vehicle chargers. There's a lot that's going on. And I think the climate goals gives us a sort of an overarching framework to think about what those changes mean. But it's clear, whether you're looking at the impact of the gas leak at Aliso Canyon on the electric sector, looking at the Clean Power Plan, looking at the development of new technologies, that energy is and electricity is a complex and interrelated subject, and so we're very fortunate in this panel to have an incredible mix of expertise, really great leaders and thinkers in the industry who are thinking about these new approaches and how it affects California's climate goals. And so we'll hear from all of them about not just sort of what the goals are, but really think about how the solutions are coming so we can ensure that we meet these goals. So I will introduce the panel in just a minute. You have bios in your packets, and many of these people, in fact, all of them are quite famous in their own regard, so I won't spend a lot of time reading bios. And what I want to do with this panel is I'll ask everybody an opening question. We'll spend a few minutes talking about that, and then hopefully we'll have some time to talk amongst ourselves and with the audience about some of the kind of overarching issues that are facing California as we move forward on these climate goals. So I'm going to introduce the panel. Probably I have a different order in my notes, but let me start here with Susan Kennedy, who is the founder and CEO of Advanced Microgrid Solutions, and a long history in politics and policy. I'm very glad to have you with us. And then next to her is Richard Maullin, the chair of the board of the California Independent System Operator, chair of the Board of Governors. Rachael Nava is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the University of California. And next to her is Michael Picker, President of the California Public Utilities Commission, Pedro Pizarro, President of Southern California Edison, and Dennis Rodriguez, the Chief City Executive at Siemens. So we really have a great mix of public policy makers in both the public and the private sector. So let me start with President Picker and ask you to talk about what's the role of the Public Utilities Commission in meeting the climate goals, and what are those key regulatory actions that you see in terms of meeting the governor's goals around renewables and energy efficiency?
I think when you're discussing an arc of events, it's important to remember that each policy is discrete, but they all tend to build on each other. So I think that probably one of the important forerunners of the current era is the point at which we divorced energy from utility compensation. Utilities now purchase contracts, and they don't get a lot of money for that. And we also cut their need to build capital infrastructure in order to produce energy efficiency. We compensate them for that separately. If you add to that a climate goal, and particularly the forcing tactic of the renewable portfolio standard, where we cause them to spend ratepayer money to procure from technologies that weren't really in the marketplace at the time, renewable power, and you start to see a series of shifts in where we get our electricity from fossil towards renewables. But that was successful, and we can't just stop there. As a matter of fact, renewables have become a commodity, and they're less and less important. We needed to get them into the marketplace to be able to provide clean electricity, but they are not the goal themselves. They allow us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the electric industry. They are not themselves the end point. The purpose here is to hit our 2030 and 2050 greenhouse gas goals. And just as an aside, California's carbon budget is actually weighted towards transportation. 40% of our carbon comes from transportation, 30% comes from use of gas in buildings, and about 20% comes from the electric industry. And so one of the things that we will see in terms of policy is using clean electricity to steal market share from these other industries, from the gas industry and from the petroleum industry. Our challenge now, though, is how do you really optimize around that initial goal of greenhouse gas emission reduction. And building more renewables may get you more electricity, and that may be useful and valuable, but it is not necessarily the same thing as GHG reduction. And we're starting to see new opportunities starting to come about as a result of new technologies. And so while we don't really need to purchase them now because we need the electricity, except in very specific locations, we have to really accept and expect that this trend, some of these trends are going to continue. And first and foremost is the advent of information technologies within the grid itself. And so we have a lot better ability to not only know what's going on in the grid, but actually then to be able to manage use differently. So time of use rates, we're starting to see technologies like battery storage that allow people to be very creative in how they arbitrage from those periods of where we have a lot of electricity to those periods where we have very little electricity. We're now turning that to customers where they can actually manage their own time of use. That's an accelerating project. And it all comes about because we have smart meters and smart technologies that can actually go where the demand is and give people information that allows them to manage it. Energy efficiency is across the board. You change the building envelope. Demand response means that you actually have tools to shift and to manage how you use electricity to avoid those peak periods where everybody is using electricity and to meet your needs during the off-peak hours. And that's arbitrage. It's a very simple financial concept. The second thing is that a lot of these technologies for producing energy are now getting down to the level of customers as well. And they want them. The portal here is rooftop solar. Everybody gets it, everybody wants it. But it's now starting to open the door to all these other opportunities. And so all of a sudden, the grid itself that manages it is becoming more and more critical. As a matter of fact, what we're seeing is the dumb wooden pole is actually becoming more financially and technologically important than renewables. Because the fleet of poles that hold the wires that come to your house are getting old, and there's a lot of competition from telecommunication providers to actually get onto those poles. Those poles are an essential utility function not only for consumers and for moving power around, but for moving telecommunications. The latest is that mobile broadband wants to be at the top of poles, which is direct conflict with the electricity because you've got people climbing around to install things near charged wires. You're also adding a lot of weight. So in this era, to help us meet our 2030 goals, probably the most important things we can do involve all the steps that we can take to actually provide more customer choice, perfect that grid, and to actually teach people to manage. So for me, the advice I give to people is invest on trees on the west-facing side of your house to cool during the heat of the summer sun, and invest in more wooden poles. LADWP is going to spend $1.2 billion in their next cycle replacing old wooden poles, and SCE that's about 60% of their current rate case request. So think about how that dumb wooden pole is actually starting to shape the opportunity as much as all these complicated, glitzy utilities that focus our attention.
Thank you. So let me just ask you a quick follow-up, and then we'll get on to some of the other panelists. As you talk about the customer choice, distributed resources, the role of the grid, what's the role of the Public Utilities Commission in helping to shape or to guide the policies here in California?
We're established to create monopolies and then to protect those monopolies against competition. And we were designed to prevent ruinous competition in the railway industry and to ensure universal services to all markets. The railroads wanted to build highly profitable lines to one or two markets. They all competed there. and nobody was serving the rest of the state. So the deal was to protect them against themselves in competition, a more efficient way to accumulate capital for investment. We were created to enforce that, to issue the franchise and to enforce it, and then to protect ratepayers against gouging and ensure universal access. We're in a different world. We are in a really different world. So now our task is really to figure out how to use the ability of the utilities to accumulate capital very quickly at cheap cost, to keep them financially stable, to buy that expensive infrastructure and get to scale very quickly. Nobody here wants to have to buy their own wooden pole. You want them to do it, and you want them to perfect the design and to manage it. That's a huge piece of the existing monopoly franchise. But how do we allow all these other technologies to come forward, given that our bread and bone is to avoid and to stilt competition at the CPUC? And so the challenge here is to make, because we're not good at technology, we're a lot of economists and lawyers, is how do you make a lot of small mistakes really quickly that everybody can survive and learn from? And so we're pioneering a bunch of proceedings that basically take this step of first we'll walk, then we'll jog, then we'll run.
Well, thank you. Let me turn now to Richard Maullin. The California system operator, I think, is might be a little bit mysterious to many people here in the audience, but it certainly plays an incredibly important role in managing electricity flow and facilitating the wholesale power market for most of California's power grid, except here in Los Angeles.
Right.
But and so maybe just to start out with SB 350, we're all familiar with, and a lot of the attention has been focused on renewables and on energy efficiency, but SB 350 as well articulated that the legislature is intent to prepare to see the ISO expanded into a regional, sort of have a regional function. So could you talk a little bit about what the ISO does currently and sort of what is this, what drove the legislature to sort of talk about an expanded kind of vision for the ISO and the role it would play in a much larger renewable energy market?
Certainly. The ISO certainly is probably one of the most mysterious entities that is involved in the resolution of all these energy issues that we're here to talk about today. Let me give you a brief bit of history. The ISO was created in 1997, and its principal job is and continues to be the balancing of energy supply and demand. It's a very sophisticated process to run the energy marketplace that allows buyers and sellers of electricity and electrical products to interact with each other. There's about 28,000 excuse me, 28,000 interactions a day involving about 150 buyers and sellers of electricity. The ISO is not a government agency. It actually is a nonprofit company that was created by the legislature, as I said, in 1997. And it, as a non-governmental agency, is seemingly apart from the agencies, the PUC, the Air Resources Board, and the Energy Commission that work on different aspects of implementing California's energy policies. But in fact, there is a direct linkage in the ISO to the policy process, in that this would be great. Let's see if that does any help. As I was saying, the ISO is integrated into the policy picture by the fact that the Board of Governors is selected by the governor of California, and it's subject to confirmation by the California Senate. So that linkage provides a basis of cooperation between all of the energy agencies and this nonprofit corporation, whose principal task is to make sure that there is a balance between energy supply and demand. It's a process that involves a very sophisticated computer programming to allow the transactions to occur in real time. The balancing process is conducted every 4 seconds by this sophisticated software. And it provides, as I said, about 20,000 transactions daily between 150 or so people who are involved in either the buying or the selling of electricity. Nancy, I don't know if there's any more that you want me to...
No, that's a helpful background. The expansion of renewables in California has, I think, created some question about the ability of the grid to deal with these renewables all throughout the year and even throughout the day. What role will the ISO play in helping to manage that integration of renewables into the electricity market?
Well, up until about 20 years ago, the work of assuring a balance between supply and demand was a fairly easy proposition. Now, with the high levels of renewables entering the marketplace, there's a great need for a very detailed understanding of what happens when renewable energy is online and providing a portion of the power that we use every day. One of the things that we've noticed as we grow to an increasing amount of renewables in the system is that there are times when we produce actually too much renewable energy in the sense that the demand is lower, and yet the resource has output that is pretty constant throughout the year. The idea of regional markets is part of the process of in effect, finding other places to sell the production from renewable energy that we experience in California.
Thank you. So let me turn to Pedro. You've heard from your regulator and the grid operator, and as utilities like Southern California Edison are working towards these climate goals, towards the renewables goals. What are the options and what are you considering in trying to manage all of these goals and continue to provide reliable service to your customers and to think about the transition with more distributed resources and these information technologies that we've heard about into the grid and where the role for energy efficiency and storage and all of the new kinds of resources that are coming into the utility marketplace.
Oh, sure thing. Thanks, Nancy. Probably worth just stepping back and thinking historically about the role of the utility and the regulator. This system was designed over 100 years ago to move electrons from big plants to end users. And it did that through large wires that connected to small wires on those wooden poles. And that required big capital. And so you needed a central entity that could attract the capital and think in 30 and 40-year time windows. And there's a whole process around working with the regulator to determine what customers need. So, when we make big investments, we actually go to these customer need determinations. So we jointly determine what you, the customer, needs. Okay. So that was a model, and we were a central planner. While we'll still have some level of central planning going into how we use all these tools, the reality is it's a really different world. And it's a different mindset that we need, and I think all of us collectively need, because the reality is that there are more and more choices that are coming to customers' fingertips and backyards and roofs and garages. And so as we think about how we get to the ultimate goal of safe, reliable, affordable service that's also meeting our greenhouse gas goals, is we have a whole lot of tools out there, but they do require the utility to take a different role. And I'd say a couple key elements in that role. First of all, we have to maintain a really good grid, right? Because that grid is the highway system that allows all the different cars, to be moved around, using the kind of analogy there. And that grid is about, not only the poles, the wires, but it's also the information technologies that will be needed to think intelligently and connect all these resources intelligently. The mix of those resources is just changing dramatically. And, a lot of folks don't realize we actually don't make most of the power that we provide to those of you who are customers. We buy about 85% of the electrons from the open market. Today, about 24% of those electrons are renewables, on the way to 33% by 2020, which we have under contract already, and the 50% goal that we now have in the state. And that doesn't include the electrons coming from solar rooftops, which are not part of that accounting mechanism. And a whole set of resources, geothermal, wind, solar, biomass, small hydro, all of which count under the renewable program. So that's one element of it. We lend our balance sheet to sign contracts with entities that can then make those investments, deliver the resources, and deliver this new balance, new mix of resources in our portfolio. That's still a fairly bulk power, kind of big plant view. Increasingly, though, I think the center of the universe in many ways is moving from that large bulk power system to the neighborhood level with distributed resources. And that's why it's so essential that we maintain a strong grid, so that if we have a consumer who's making a choice to put solar on the rooftop, or to put a battery in the garage, or to plug in an electric vehicle, I think they want us to have a robust grid that's ready to make that interconnection within days, not within weeks or months. And so a lot of our work internally is making sure we're gearing up our processes to make that happen. And one quick little example, a year ago, it used to take us a full 30 days, 36 days, I think, to go from you having a completed application for your new solar rooftop system and us being able to review it and make sure that we could interconnect. We blew up a bunch of internal processes. Today it takes us a day and a half, right? Because we recognize that consumers will want that flexibility from us. That also means then that we need to be ready to accommodate and to use distributed resources, and they'll have a lot of different flavors to them. Some of them will be enabled by customers making the choice that they want it, whether it's for economics or for environmental reasons or some combination of the above. I think more and more of those resources we will be procuring, soliciting, because they may play a big role in helping offset some of our traditional distribution capital needs. So maybe instead of that extra pole or that extra wire, we might be able to use that distributed resource. We have a pilot going on right now on preferred resources at a distributed level, and we've taken an area in Orange County with about 250,000 homes and businesses where we've been targeting several hundred megawatts worth of procurement. We're doing things like, you'll hear from Susan Kennedy in a little bit here, but we have a contract with her company for 50 megawatts of utility scale behind the meter storage. So, Nancy, we see that we'll need a whole suite of tools, because it's going to take more than one just arrow in the quiver. But throughout it all, as a utility, we'll have this responsibility and need to maintain a wire system that can be the infrastructure that interconnects all of this. And also, in many cases, we need to have the strength of the balance sheet to be able to enable those resources to come to market through contracts and through that procurement process.
Thanks. Just a quick follow-up, if you could talk just for a minute about sort of what the role of the kind of conventional utility resources will, in your view, will play in this market going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that I think a lot of the public who maybe is not as close to the intricacies of electricity would like to say, well, we don't need conventional resources. And there may come a time in the future when that's the case. That's not today, by any means. We really need all of the above right now. And when I think even 5 years back, when I was last with Edison, I came back a year and a half ago, a lot of the planning around what's called resource adequacy, having enough of a reserve margin to cover that hottest, peak moment in the hottest day of the summer. A lot of the planning was geared around that, and how do we have enough resources that can ramp up and down and meet that peak. Today, if you look at last year should have been a very tough year in terms of keeping the lights on, as far as availability of electrons, because due to the drought, our hydro resources in the state were at all-time lows. Turns out, peak was fine, because we've had so much growth on the distributed solar side that there were plenty of electrons in general, right, at those peak hours. But the challenge was different. The challenge was that now, the ramps that we have in the system that the ISO is managing at the bulk power level, those ramps are now huge, right? Because when the sun starts coming down, we have thousands of megawatts of resources across the state that just go away within about a 10-minute period. Okay? And so there's a greater role for those conventional resources in managing those ramps and providing flexibility to the system. In the future, we may see more of that driven by storage. But in terms of the economics today, those conventional resources tend to be more economical, particularly with natural gas prices being what they are today, more economical in managing those ramps. So, long way of saying, we do see a continued need for those resources until other technologies continue to climb down the cost curve and can provide those services at a better price point for consumers.
Thanks. So we've talked this morning about the evolution of both the markets and regulation, starting back with the railroads. But we're starting to really see some interesting new entrants into the market to provide some of the services that Pedro was just talking about. So turning to Susan Kennedy, your company, Advanced Microgrid Solutions, is developing a storage and IT solution that you're calling hybrid electric buildings. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your model and your working with Edison and others, and how does this work for the utility, how does this work for the building owner, and how does this work for the market in general?
Great. First of all, let me clarify. We trademarked hybrid electric buildings.
Okay.
Just want to make that clear.
Absolutely. I'll put that in my notes.
So I feel a little bit like the arsonist turned fireman in some respects, because I've been working with some of my colleagues here for many, many years on developing a lot of the policies that brought so much of the renewable energy onto the grid and a lot of the distributed resources that are now creating havoc and balancing the supply and the demand. And lo and behold, now it's created a market where, we've come up with one of those solutions where we think can really be helpful in that. So it's been a great transition and a great perspective. So there's a lot of technologies that are available today to be addressing the issues that have been raised about balancing the grid, about managing, integration of renewables, reducing carbon and everything. And there's a number of ways to bring those. A lot of companies are designing these technologies and they're bringing them to market. In many cases, they're focused on bringing them to market on the customer side of the meter in a way that it's disruptive to the utility business model. And their intention is to sort of turn the business model up on its head and give consumers more choices by giving them control over their own load. But we've taken a different approach to this. In our view, the real goal is to be able to. We want to bring the market to the technology. We think that's where the real issue is in terms of being able to utilize some of these new technologies, is bringing the market to the technology. So we've designed a project development team that takes the best available technologies that are out there today, and put them together in a way that harnesses the building load, as much of the building load as possible, and enables it with technology on both sides of the battery, on the building load side and on the distribution level side, to have an intelligent storage system in order to provide what the utility needs as demand management at a large grid scale level. And I think that the chart that's up on the screen is probably the best chart that describes the problem that you're trying to solve in terms of pioneering these new technologies. The red line is a customer that has put solar on. And this is a customer who thinks, you know, I'm putting solar on, I'm cleaning the grid, I'm taking control of my own destiny, I'm getting off the utility, and you know, I'm doing great for the environment, and I'm also saving a lot of money, or you know, while I'm doing it. And in that case, you can see how in the red, their load goes up and down, and when it hits that line across the middle, it goes negative, and it sends electrons from their solar system back to the grid. And they get a nice, healthy payment from the utility for doing that. And then at the end of the day, when the sun stops shining, the solar doesn't provide so much benefit, and their load now shoots back to the grid. And you can see how quickly it shoots up when the sun stops shining at the end of the day. That blue line on top is the distribution grid view, where the utility it has to buy the power plants and the peaker plants that Pedro was talking about to be on standing spinning reserve in order to be ready when that customer's solar stops shining at the end of the day. So that customer who thinks, I'm saving tons of carbon by putting solar on my roof. If you don't put some ability to harness that load on with that solar, you're costing probably 2 tons of carbon by forcing the utility to have a peaker plant on standing reserve in order to be able to be ready when you shoot back to the grid, or on a day when the sun isn't shining so much and you need the grid. So and it's extremely costly because every customer is paying twice. Not only are you paying for when you shoot back to the grid and you have to pay for the electricity that's at a very, very expensive time of the day, but you're also paying, all of us are paying, in order to have that peaker plant on standing reserve, spinning reserve, in order to be able to. So you're paying twice in order to be able to use that system. The green line is that exact same customer putting storage behind paired with their solar in order to be able to harness the solar earlier in the day when it's not quite as useful, but you can actually store some of the solar so that at the end of the day, when the sun stops shining, you can prevent your demand from shooting back to the grid, but use your stored solar energy to be able to harness that load so it's a smooth transition to later in the day. Now, not only does it save the customer more money, but it also creates the holy grail in terms of distribution planning for the utility, because you put a battery on that customer's meter, we know exactly what the customer's load is going to be, and so they can now plan from a distribution perspective what kind of reserves they need to have. So you're going to bring the whole distribution system cost curve down when you do that. So our business model is to use the technologies, including energy storage, to harness as much of the building loads as possible and turn them into a resource that is a grid scale. And so we have identified, our first major project for Southern California Edison is a fleet of office buildings in Orange County, 22, 24, I can't remember the count now, of very, very large office buildings where we're using energy storage to harness as much as half the building load, sometimes more than half the building load. So that when we need to switch those, but when we get a dispatch order from the utility, we can take all 22 buildings and flip them to batteries like a hybrid electric car. So that fleet of buildings now becomes a virtual peaker plant with no emissions, no distribution upgrades, where you can literally see 10 megawatts of load drop from the grid instantaneously, dropping load on the entire circuit. So first thing we do is analyze every building for what is the efficiency level of that building, how are they using energy today, what's causing their energy usage, how do we harness the load using batteries and software to know exactly what the building load is going to do at any given time of the day, how it behaves when the temperature changes, and then we harness that load by installing state-of-the-art energy storage at the building site. These are large systems. These are not little systems that are designed for rate arbitrage. They're systems that are designed to actually cap the load of the building and take the load off the grid when that's distributed. I mean, when we're given a dispatch order to do so. And then we put in the very sophisticated analytics and operational software for the building owner that allows them to see their cost, their carbon intensity, their efficiency level at any given time during the day and over time, so they know exactly what's happening with their building. And we give them the intelligence tools in order to be able to plan and manage their electricity consumption, which, shocking to me but most building owners do not have that level of transparency into what their building is doing and why. So by arming them with that kind of technology, with the batteries that allow them to shape their usage around what's needed for the grid, you're enabling not only to them to reduce their energy consumption, but you're also enabling them to monetize the building load in a way that helps the grid. Because the grid, the utilities will pay you to be available if you can harness it and it's fully firm and dispatchable. And there's no behavior involved. So it monetizes the building load in that way. It can also, because it's batteries, it's not just one function. You can actually sync generation. When you have too much solar during the middle of the day, you have the ability to harness those building loads where they can actually consume more by charging the batteries in the middle of the day when you need to sync generation. We've got clients where we're putting in energy storage that have to turn off their solar during the day because they have too much and they're exporting it to the grid. So if you don't have a system that allows you to harness and control your demand and your consumption, you're wasting a lot of money and you're causing costs onto the grid. So then we take the building loads and we cluster them in as large quantities as we can, targeted at substations so that it becomes a fully automated, dispatchable peaker plant system, network of peaker plants that the utility can dispatch as quickly, not only at the building level, but at the circuit level and at the substation level. So we provide that level of control all the way up to the substation level and is dispatchable by the utility. And so that's, we think utilities are going to spend $1 trillion over the next decade on their distribution, transmission, and acquired resources. $1 trillion. We spent in the US, $200 billion in 2014 alone just on the distribution system, chasing that load curve, trying to figure out how to balance supply and demand at the customer level and at the grid level. Our business model is very simple. We would like some of the billions of dollars they're going to spend and be the resource that actually helps them balance the grid.
Thanks, Susan. Well, speaking of billions of dollars, yeah.
We'll do it for millions. We'll do it for millions.
We're already helping, Susan.
So the University of California, Rachael, is both a large customer and for utilities that have one of the campuses in their service territory, you're going to be one of their largest customers. And then, so we'll talk a little bit about that, and then the other obvious role of the University of California in research and helping to develop these new technologies. So let's start with your role on the customer side, and what does a system like the University of California do play? What the role does it play in helping the state to meet those greenhouse gas goals, and your role as a customer, as a utility customer?
Well, we have multiple interactions, I think, on this topic. And I wanted to start off talking about our sustainable investment strategy first. And obviously, we have a research component, and then and we have large facilities that we're operating. We are essentially operating 10 small cities with each of our campuses. But on the sustainability side, we have a large pension and endowment fund. It's about $100 billion. And we have recently made a commitment to invest about $1 billion of that in climate solutions and strategies, sustainable strategies. And as part of that, we, in fall of last year, announced a sustainable investment framework, so that as we're going about and identifying opportunities for investing our funds, we do that risk analysis in the context of a sustainability framework. And we think that's really important because we want to commit to climate change technologies. We want to not only pilot some of those things in our own campuses, but also promote those in the investments that we're making. Related to that, we have recently had the opportunity to participate in the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, which many of you are probably familiar with. This is Bill Gates announced several, actually during the Paris climate talks in December, the opportunity for 28 private investors to come together to really focus on, and I think we have a slide or two here, on how to catalyze investment and research and partner with private industry and government and research institutions to really focus on the challenge of how do you take basic and applied research and actually commercialize that. And one of the challenges we have as an industry, I think, particularly in the energy industry, is how do you attract, and this is what Marissa was talking about, how do you attract the right type of capital and investment into that, into moving the needle on accelerating innovation and investing in technology so you can commercialize it. And it's we talk about the valley of death. It really is true. There's just very little traditional capital that you can invest there. So the idea behind the Breakthrough Energy Coalition is to bring money to bear in those early stage investments where you've got to take a product and how do you actually make it a viable, scalable company that once it's kind of through those initial stages is able to attract traditional capital. So that's what the focus of the Breakthrough Energy Coalition is, and the university is very pleased to be a part of that. I will say that the Breakthrough Energy Coalition believes very strongly that there's an opportunity not just for private industry, but also for government partnerships. And I think you're all probably familiar with the mission innovation strategy, but this is where we really need to leverage government to invest in basic and applied research to make sure that we're accelerating innovation as much as we can, and then partnering with private industry to then commercialize. So that's the premise behind the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, and I thought I'd show you a fun picture. This is my boss, Janet Napolitano, who's the University of California president, along with Bill Gates and our chief investment officer, Jagdeep Bashir, who runs our pension and endowment funds. And this was at actually the Paris Climate Talks where they announced the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. So getting to the focus of your question, but I thought that framework might be useful, the university is really focused on how do we leverage our living laboratories. We look at the university system with our 10 campuses, our 5 academic medical centers, and our 3 national labs as living laboratories. We have over 200,000 faculty and staff. We have 251,000 students. We have 61 Nobel laureates. We have over 1,400 active patents. We are a research and economic engine, and we see that we have the opportunity to really iterate on technologies and to try things, and we have enough scale that we can try them and see whether they work and whether they're applicable to other universities, other municipalities, and we want to share those ideas. And so this is part of a broader context that the university has called our Carbon Neutrality Initiative. We have a goal that our president, Napolitano, set for us that we will be carbon neutral in all of our campuses by 2025. This is an audacious goal for us, and it's requiring all of our best minds, both on the operational side and also on the research side, to look at how do we try new technologies, how do we leverage our research to try to become not only energy efficient, but also promote science around climate change. We recently released this report called Bending the Curve. This was a really exciting thing for the university. We published over 50 different of our top climate scientists came together under the direction of Ram Ramanathan, who's a distinguished professor at UC San Diego, at the Scripps Institute, what we call 10 scalable solutions to climate change. And it's not just focused on science, like how do you reduce short-term climate pollutants, but also how do we focus on the cultural and social issues related to climate change. We have 40 million people in just the United States alone that don't necessarily believe that climate change is real. And so how do we create a moral imperative? And what's unique about this for the university is it's not just us bringing our science forward, it's also about us talking about solutions. And so that's what our focus is, and we want to leverage what we're trying to do to become carbon neutral at the university and share those around the world.
Thank you, Rachel. I think it's an interesting and a good segue there to Dennis. Siemens is a company that's been around a long time and very familiar to, I think, everybody in the energy industry. But, you know, as we think about these goals, about customers, about new entrants, about the policy and regulatory framework, how do we manage, what does a company like Siemens do to help us manage this transition and integrate these new technologies into buildings, into utility systems? Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for having me here on the panel. And you made a comment at the top of the panel about famous panelists. I think that applies to most of the panelists here, but I'm not quite sure I'm at that category. So happy to be a part of this panel. I thought I'd take a little bit of a step back. Siemens is a global company. We're here talking about California climate goals. But from a Siemens perspective, we look at things on a macro basis. So one of the things that we really analyze very closely is megatrends. Megatrends help us kind of outline what our business perspective is going to be from a macro position. And when you're talking about megatrends in this setting, I think one of the primary megatrends that stands out to us is urbanization. So the statistics say that by the year 2050, approximately 2/3 of the world's population is going to live in urban locations. So what that really means is that these urban locations, these urban centers, these city centers really have a duty and a responsibility to keep their infrastructure in place, keep their infrastructure reliable, keep it effective, keep it accessible, keep it cheap, and also keep it sustainable. I think we're moving in that direction, and that's something that's shaping up in today's climate. So sustainable infrastructure really indicates for Siemens that it has a minimal impact on the climate. And so we've looked at this megatrend, we've analyzed it, and basically our output for this conclusion is that we've put a very large emphasis on urban infrastructure solutions, urban infrastructure needs. And I think we've got a slide here as well. The next slide.
It's self-serve.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Never mind.
That sounds right for an energy panel. So from a Siemens perspective, we really look at these urban locations in terms of what smart technology can be applied. Susan talked about smart grid technology. We employ a smart grid technology group as well. We've got intelligent traffic solutions. We've got mobility solutions. We have urban infrastructure solutions, and not the least of which is our building technology group, which focuses on building technology components. So this has been a real transition for the company over the past 15 years. I think we've basically started this megatrend analyzation around the year 2000. We've spearheaded it in the year 2012 by opening up a group that we call the City Center of Competence. So the City Center of Competence is a global group that positions different kind of city executives in different locations, which I'm a part of here in Los Angeles. And their sole track is to look at these urban infrastructure solutions within these large cities. So we've also created a group in London that we call the Crystal. The Crystal is one of the world's most sustainable structures. And it really showcases Siemens technology components in relation to renewable energy, building technology, wastewater treatment technology. We put this all into the Crystal. It's part office space, part exhibit space. And at the end of the day, it's really a showcase for the company. And we are proud to say that it's BREEAM Outstanding certified and also LEED Platinum certified. So it's easily one of the most sustainable structures out there in the marketplace. You pivot back to California. I think that from a Siemens perspective, we've been operating in the U.S. for pretty much the past 7 decades. We have about 70,000 employees in the U.S., of which I think about 10% are located in California. So California is a huge focus point for us. And we're happy to kind of carry the mantra of the company, which is really focusing on how we make these urban infrastructure solutions climate friendly here into California. That's a very important focus for us.
Great. Well, thank you. So I think I'm going to just open up a couple of questions to the panel. Let me start first. We heard from J.P. Morgan Chase about sort of the financial market view of these climate goals and the kinds of tools, and we've talked about investments, $1 trillion on the infrastructure, grid infrastructure, distribution grid infrastructure, billions of dollars on millions and billions of dollars on wood poles and things like that. What do you all see as the sort of greatest opportunity or needs for capital investment. Maybe I'll start with Pedro, since you've got to spend some money as you think about climate goals and the transformation of the utility industry, and then I'd like to hear other comments as well.
Sure. So context about our own spending. We are spending around $4 billion a year in capital across the company. About $3 billion of that is for the distribution system. There's another, call it $700 million, depending on the year, on transmission needs at the direction of the CalISO. And then the balance is maintenance capital for the generation plants we have. IT actually is a big piece, and it's computer systems will be a growing piece, I think, over the next several years as we look at how we modernize the grid, prepare it. Access to the capital markets is one of the big things that we have to do as a Fortune 500 company, right? We're investor-owned. We are in the capital markets, both in terms of equity and debt. And I think from an investor perspective, if you look at the California experience, there was that moment there through the energy crisis that really shook the market's confidence. And I think, credit to California, we rebuilt the framework. And so there was a lot of rebuilding that was needed. But I think that as investors look at us and our story as a company, they see a state that has a continued need for strong infrastructure. A lot of our system is aging, and so a lot of it was put in right after World War II. So we have 1.5 million poles, going back to President Picker's comments, and they're not designed for 100 years, but some of them are already. So we need to make sure we are either replacing or repairing in order to make sure the infrastructure is strong. Also, as we go to this new energy world, I mentioned the need for a strong grid. That means we need to harden the grid in a number of places in order to make sure that it's ready to accommodate the new resources coming on, and that is part of that capital spent. Maybe the other two things I'll say quickly. From an investor perspective, they also want to see stability, though, in the framework and the compact. I think California has done a good job here with that. They will have questions as the model continues to evolve in terms of what's the ability to see a path to recovery, off and on capital. And then the final point I'd make is not just about our access to capital as a company, but it's also about the strength of our balance sheet, which then our vendors, our suppliers rely on. So when we do a 10-year contract or a 20-year contract for, a utility scale central solar field, or for, Susan's, storage and building work, that balance sheet and the strength of our balance sheet is then, coupled with a long-term contract, which our suppliers can literally take to the bank to get their own financing. And so that's a critical piece of the puzzle here in terms of California's continued access to the capital markets to ensure infrastructure.
Can I add?
Sure.
So, this is really a key issue in terms of bringing these technologies to market. We've gone out and raised like $200 million in order to deploy these technologies out in the field. And the reason we were able to do that is solely because we had an agreement with the utility that gave us something to take to the bank. If you don't, if you're trying to finance these technologies, you're either selling your solution to the utility or you're selling your solution to the end user. And if you're selling your solution to the end user, the ROI on that is going to be based on the pocketbook issue of how much money am I saving? What's my return on that investment? What am I getting for whatever I'm doing? And so if you're having to pay for that deployment out of the savings that customer would achieve, you've taken the value proposition away immediately, almost in half or 100%. And you're dumbing down the solution into the least cost solution you can possibly install. So if the only way you're really going to see these kind of technologies at scale, where they can provide a solution at the grid level, is by extracting the value of that solution on the utility side of the meter. If you're not part of that solution at a grid scale level, you will never find the ROI on that investment on the customer side alone. And you will be limited in terms of how you'll scale that. So the holy grail is going to be monetizing the value on both sides of the customer meter and at the utility scale.
So I think Susan's case actually illustrates why I think that renewables are a declining force as a driver. She pointed out how too much renewables actually increases the demand for gas and produces more carbon. So I think that it also illustrates how having a light regulatory hand actually can enable these new technologies to compete with renewables to meet our needs. And again, our needs are greenhouse down, reliability up, and cost competitiveness. What actually produced the opportunity for the utility to invest in advanced microgrid services is the failure of the San Onofre nuclear power plant. It created a crisis. And fortunately, Commissioner Florio, one of Susan's former colleagues at the CPUC, said, we don't have time to try to do this the hard way. We're just going to say to the utility, get 50% of what you need to replace it, that's the 50% goal, from anything that is carbon-free and works, and the rest from conventional resources. And so as a result, they went out and they purchased a lot of tactics like this that never would have been considered under the renewable portfolio standard. The renewable portfolio standard was designed to force a narrow range of technologies. Innovation happens faster than we can legislate or regulate. And that kind of a framework tells investors that they will provide a cash stream that allows them to build the project up front, and the cash stream will then come from utility ratepayer payments over time. And so that's what we have to begin to move to. It's a system where renewables compete against renewables, where demand-side techniques compete against generation.
And it forced us to compete in a competitive procurement at the utility level against all other resources. So you're actually driving costs down to these new technologies, whereas the mandate subsidy alone approach keeps costs high.
Yeah, and if I could just piggyback on that. So that procurement was one where we took a look at multiple kinds of resources. We looked at gas plants, we looked at storage, energy efficiency, demand response, distributed solar, et cetera. And so now, to be very transparent about that, we do have a lot of places where we have different mandates today, and so we looked at all these things simultaneously, but they were not fully competing against each other. We're competing simultaneously within the slices of market. I will tell you what nirvana would be for me, and I'm not sure it's achievable, but we have advocated actually jointly with LADWP and other utilities a couple of years back, was let's define what the objective is for California. And I think you articulated it well. Ultimately, it's greenhouse gas reduction, right?
Reliability up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, and doing it all safely, right? Because you got to integrate it. One could imagine just saying, look, here's the target. It's greenhouse gas reduction. Here's some constraints on reliability, et cetera. Now, go at it. Go to market. Let the market speak. And so don't legislate or don't regulate this lies being for renewables, or this lies being for this kind of renewable, which we've done in California. I recognize it's part of, walking, jogging, running. Maybe that's the full run stage. The other piece on that is today, again, a lot of the investment is being done relying on long-term utility contracts. I'll give you another nirvana there. Maybe we can get ourselves to market structures ultimately that are mature enough and that folks have enough confidence in that maybe you don't need quite as long a contract because you can rely on an ongoing market. And so, you can probably get two economists debating that and they'll have three opinions among them. But, I think these are places where our market structure can continue to evolve.
Well, thanks. I think you anticipated my last question, which, as we close out this panel, is sort of, what would you see as kind of something that we could do in California in the next 5 or 10 years that would have the most impact on moving us towards our climate goals and building our economy? So I don't know who wants to jump in first, but
take that greenhouse gas target and focus on that, optimize on cost and reliability. Don't try to specify individual technologies, because by the time we actually develop rules to do that, there will be innovations on the way that technology is used that defeat the mandates.
Richard, from the
No, I
grid
agree with
operator
you.
perspective?
I think Michael has put his finger on what is the biggest challenge. I mean, if you look at the resources of the University of California, which we saw here, just that institution alone has the capability to generate numerous solutions. I think the role that government regulators ought to consider is when getting out of the way of the development of these opportunities. But I think also there's great opportunity to enhance or sort of fertilize the field for development by becoming especially smart about letting the marketplace do its own work. I think that's what Susan and Michael are both referring to, Pedro as well. A sort of, I'm going to use this, an old Soviet-style method will not work in California. It never has, and it never will. On the other hand, some creative capitalism is very much in call for today. It's the thing that provides the insight into the type of machine that provides the ramp between the setting of the sun and the reduction of demand below a level that an existing system could tolerate. I mean, having fast ramping conventional plants, they're not really conventional anymore when they fast ramp. And yet that is really one of the most important things that we can do in the short term to facilitate an environment where we are maintaining reliability, but also not standing in the way of the kind of experimentation that has been discussed here in this brief session that we have together.
Rachael, from the place where the University of California sits,
Yeah.
what does that look like?
Well, I think one of the things we've had to recognize is that there's cost up front to do these projects. I mean, to do energy efficiency and to really take a look at your buildings and figure out what do you need to do from a lighting perspective, what do we need to do in terms of managing air pressure and HVAC and all of that. And we have a lot of deferred maintenance, as many large organizations do, and balancing the upfront costs, knowing that renewable power is going to cost us more than what we can buy in terms of natural gas. The price is just, the fossil fuel prices are lower than what we're going to pay for solar. But long term, if we can take a long view, and 10 to 20 years out, which is what we've been trying to do at the University of California, the payback is there. We've invested in more than 36 megawatts of on-site renewable power that are generated directly on our campuses. We have another 28 megawatts in the process of being developed. We just are in the process of bringing up an 80 megawatt solar farm in Fresno, which is going to give us 20% of our electricity for our system-wide. We're doing a lot with biogas and other renewable sources, wind and the like. But these are big investments, and campuses for us and most organizations want predictable, reliable pricing. And so having those conversations operationally, saying, you know what, this is going to cost us more up front, and really helping people look at the long view and saying, ultimately, we're going to save money. And with our energy efficiency projects, just in 10 years, we've saved over $160 million in cumulatively avoided cost, just because we've done things like switch out our lighting. So it's worth it, but it takes a concerted effort to do it.
Dennis?
Yeah, I mean, 2 quick points on my side. I think the panel has kind of spoken to most of the things that I think we would highlight as well, but I would frame it in a little bit of a different kind of topic point, which is pilot programs. I think pilot programs and demonstration programs that are kind of put out there from a government perspective are critical. I think they allow for technology innovation to come into the marketplace. I know Siemens has jumped into a bunch of these up and down the whole state of California, related to a variety of different technology topics. But in addition to the large companies, it also allows medium-sized companies and small companies to kind of introduce their innovations to the marketplace and see if it's got a sticking point. And it's technology agnostic, and it's also kind of innovative in the sense that it just brings these different creative solution sets to the marketplace. So I think pilot and demonstration projects are key. Marissa talked earlier about long-term policy goals and objectives, and I think we've heard it across the panel today. I think that's critical. If you're a business and you're trying to outline your business perspective, you've really got to look at what's stable, what's achievable, what's going to take place over the next 5 to 10 years. And if you're getting mixed signals from the public sector, it's a challenge to outline that business case over that time frame. And so to the extent that they can, I think the government has to kind of indicate clear policy objectives over a certain amount of time so businesses can kind of make their business plans for that time frame.
Great, thanks. Susan, last word.
I'm going to use my friend Dennis a little bit as a foil. No more pilots. Pilots are, you cannot get the cost of these technologies down if you can't scale. The whole key right now is scale. So being able to, the one thing is eliminating the barriers, the regulatory barriers at every level, at the grid operator level, at the regulatory level with the utilities, how these technologies are seen as products in the market, because there's different definitions for how you measure and settle for a non-generating resource, depending on whether you're utility or at the CAISO level. Removing those barriers and allowing these products to be non-generating resources to be utilized at scale at the distribution level.
Well, thanks. I guess I would just say that I think this panel really demonstrates how, in a really interesting way, that the climate goals are now really part of the way we do business, and that they really are integrated into these larger, or maybe they are the larger market forces that are creating both change and opportunity in the energy sector in ways I think that no one would have predicted, just a few years ago. So please help me in thanking this fantastic panel. All right. Thank you. All right.